Our story begins with a young man who had the audacity to sign up for a money-saving reality show where surviving on 500 yuan for a month could lead to winning 5 million. Most people's first instinct would be to live off instant noodles or eat once a day to save money, but for our protagonist, those are just amateur tactics. When it comes to being stingy and squeezing out every possible benefit, he is practically a grandmaster of the craft. On the first day of the show, he woke up before dawn and, relying on memory, left the dormitory to go for a jog along the empty streets. Since he couldn't see the live comments, he had no idea the viewers were already calling him a fool for wasting energy. The audience assumed the contestants would sleep all day to reduce calorie intake, and they were shocked to see someone up so early. With the sun not yet up, they wondered what he was doing. Surely he wasn't just morning jogging? To them, such behavior seemed utterly ridiculous. At a time like this, shouldn't he be conserving energy to avoid hunger and save money? Some viewers were so frustrated they claimed they could do better. One commenter boasted they could lie still for 48 hours without eating or spending a cent. They questioned why he was focusing on self-discipline now. They accused him of putting on a show as if he were an idol, suggesting he belonged in a talent competition instead of wasting this opportunity. Meanwhile, he kept running for about 10 minutes while the insults continued to pour in, until he finally stopped in front of a local pharmacy. As he pulled a flyer from his pocket, the viewers suddenly went quiet. The paper in his hand clearly displayed the words, "Free eggs." This was his first step in saving money, exploiting a promotion. He held a flyer for the Tsiyuan pharmacy, which featured a very specific offer for members, limited to 30,000 eggs daily. We should note that these kinds of events are incredibly popular among the elderly. Because the competition is so fierce, one has to arrive early to get anything, which explains the early start and the healthy jog. By 8:30, the sun was fully up and the pharmacy opened its doors. By now, a long line of seniors had formed behind him. The salesperson looked strangely at the young man standing at the very front of the line, the only youth in sight, before looking away and pointing to a sign-up sheet. The clerk politely explained that by registering a name and a phone number, he could collect the free eggs. With a calm expression, he picked up the pen, wrote down a number without hesitation, and headed back to the dorm with a pound of eggs. The comments section erupted once more, with one viewer jokingly apologizing to their mother. It seems he found a way to eat well without breaking a single rule. And so, our protagonist successfully secured his prize for free. To be honest, it was a masterclass in shameless efficiency. Some viewers admitted that as young people, they would be too embarrassed to do such a thing. But really, what is there to be ashamed of? Why feel embarrassed? Is it because of a sense of pride that isn't even worth a pound of eggs? Pride, after all, cannot fill a stomach. With this free pound of eggs, his meals for the next 2 days were effectively solved. We returned to the dormitory's communal kitchen area. This is where all the contestants must cook. The production team thoughtfully provided basic utensils and seasonings, so he only needed to give them a quick wash to enjoy a delicious egg breakfast. Just then, Meng Wei happened to come downstairs, and, hearing noise in the kitchen, she quietly approached. "You bought so many eggs?" she asked, watching the frying pan and unconsciously swallowing her saliva as she stared at the food. Who could refuse 2 delicious fried eggs first thing in the morning? She asked if he needed help, but Fu Yinxing simply gave a polite smile. "No need," he replied. As his voice trailed off, the only sound left in the air was the sizzling of the pan, followed by a brief, awkward silence. Meng Wei waited and waited, but she never heard the polite offer of, "Do you want to eat together?" She wondered if Fu Yinxing was truly selfish, playing dumb, or just socially inept. With so many eggs, what would be the harm in giving her 2? He clearly didn't understand social graces. She thought about how if she went out for breakfast, she couldn't find anything affordable besides instant noodles. But here was a chance for a free meal. Not wanting to let the opportunity slip away, Meng Wei smiled and tried to start a conversation again, noting how good the eggs looked and how early he was eating. She mentioned she had just woken up and hadn't eaten yet. Such a blatant hint. If Fu Yinxing still didn't get it, he was definitely doing it on purpose. He placed the fried eggs onto a plate and spoke without any particular emotion. "Then don't stand here watching me. Hurry up and go eat your own," she persisted, mentioning she also wanted some eggs because they were economical. Fu Yinxing remained unmoved, placing his remaining raw eggs into the refrigerator labeled with his name. "Then you should go outside and get some," he replied calmly. The man was truly impenetrable to her charms. The viewers noticed the tension immediately. It seemed obvious this woman was trying to take advantage of him and get a free meal. They wondered how he could possibly miss such an obvious hint. Or perhaps, he understood perfectly and was simply giving her a way to save face. In any normal situation, he might not have been stingy with 2 eggs. But here, they are competitors, and in this game, everyone is on their own. After all, this wasn't a life-or-death crisis. So why should he let Meng Wei freeload off his hard-earned supplies? He certainly wasn't about to help her save money at his own expense. As Fu Yinxing sat down at the dining table with his plate, Meng Wei followed him, wearing a thick-skinned expression and letting out a long, dramatic sigh. She wondered aloud if the market even sold eggs in pairs. She claimed she didn't want to buy as many as he had for fear of waste, noting that in this sweltering heat, food spoils quite easily. It was a classic opening move. At this point, Meng Wei might as well have asked him directly to just hand over 2 eggs for free. Instead, he simply picked up his chopsticks and lifted a perfectly fried egg. The heat had been just right, turning both sides a beautiful golden brown, crispy on the outside and tender on the inside. Meng Wei swallowed hard as her stomach betrayed her with a loud growl. He took a slow, deliberate bite before finally speaking, calmly pointing out that the refrigerator would keep things fresh. He suggested she take a walk around the neighborhood to find her own. He even added that if she truly couldn't find anyone to sell her just 2 eggs, he would be willing to sell her 2 of his. Meng Wei froze, wondering if she had heard him correctly. She repeated his words in disbelief. Sell me 2? She had only wanted a free meal, yet here he was, being so stingy that he insisted on a financial transaction over a couple of eggs. He confirmed that she hadn't misheard him, and for a moment, Meng Wei's composed expression completely crumbled. After all, they were fellow guests on the same show. They would be seeing each other for the next month, and yet, over 2 simple eggs, he actually intended to charge her money. To her, it seemed utterly absurd. Fu Yinxing's eyes held a hint of innocent confusion. If a grown adult felt comfortable freeloading, why should he feel embarrassed about asking for payment? Meng Wei's face turned a deep, frustrated shade of black. She snapped that she didn't want to freeload and would go buy her own. Once she stormed off, he finished his breakfast quickly and gave his plate a thorough wash. He headed back upstairs to plan his next meal, knowing well that those who don't think ahead will soon find themselves in trouble. A single pound of eggs wouldn't last forever. By lunchtime, we finally meet the other 2 contestants, Ji Mingchuan and Lan. Both of them were the type to skip breakfast and only eat twice a day, starting from noon. By skipping that first meal, they had already managed to save a bit of their budget. Since their eating schedules aligned, they found they had quite a lot in common. The 2 of them headed to a nearby convenience store to buy a whole case of instant noodles at a wholesale price, which they then split right down the middle. The price was right and the portion was manageable, allowing them to change flavors frequently. As they returned to the dormitory to prepare their noodles, Meng Wei wasn't about to stay idle. Taking advantage of Fu Yinxing's absence, she began to gossip, telling the others how incredibly stingy he was for trying to sell her eggs. She warned them that he was clearly obsessed with winning and would try to make money off his fellow contestants. She urged them to be careful not to get played by him. Just as the words left her mouth, Ji Mingchuan suddenly noticed a figure standing right in the kitchen doorway. Meng Wei's gaze followed his, and her heart likely skipped a beat. She shuddered in guilt the moment he walked past. Ji Mingchuan, looking at Fu Yinxing, was the first to break the awkward silence, asking if he needed the kitchen. He declined, explaining he was heading out to eat. As he looked at Ji Mingchuan's thin frame and the instant noodles in his hands, his rare sense of conscience stirred, prompting him to ask if they wanted to join. After all, it was someone else's treat, not his own. He didn't mind letting them tag along for a free meal, especially since he had no idea how many meals they might have to skip later. If one can eat well for free, one should. But Meng Wei refused, snapping that he was far too good at business, and she'd likely end up overpaying. She felt she'd just waste money. She had hinted all morning for an invitation, but he hadn't said a word until now. It was too late, she told herself. Besides, who knew if the morning's egg incident had given him new ideas for some scheme, or if he was hiding some malicious intent? She suspected he was just looking for ways to trick them out of their money. Only then did Fu Yinxing finally glance at Meng Wei, looking confused. He looked around as if searching for someone else, then calmly noted he hadn't been talking to her at all. He wondered whose question she was answering. This left Meng Wei completely humiliated, while even Ji Mingchuan and Lan struggled to hide their amusement. Naturally, Meng Wei's expression turned quite dark. It seemed Fu Yinxing certainly knew how to handle passive-aggressive behavior. The viewers wondered why that woman was still trying to backstab him. She was trying to isolate him from the group, yet she conveniently forgot to mention her own attempt to freeload his eggs. The act was crumbling. She simply couldn't handle the game. Meanwhile, we can't help but wonder if Fu Yinxing had found yet another way to secure a free meal. We were certainly looking forward to it. Ji Mingchuan shared a quick look with Lan before turning back to tear open his bag of instant noodles. With an awkward smile, he explained that their lunch was already prepared, so they wouldn't be joining him. Regardless of what they thought of Fu Yinxing, given their competitive relationship, it felt safer to keep their distance. Fu Yinxing simply nodded, accepting their decision without any fuss. He didn't say another word and turned to leave. Meng Wei smirked, feeling a secret sense of satisfaction as she watched him walk away alone. She then sat down at the table, watching Ji Mingchuan and Lan prepare their noodles. Soon, the rich aroma of the seasoning began to fill the air. As the scent wafted from the bowls, she swallowed hard. She remarked that they were eating quite early, adding that she hadn't eaten yet herself. Those words sounded remarkably familiar. One has to wonder, was Fu Yinxing the one playing games, or was the real trickery coming from someone else entirely? We can only hope our instant noodle duo doesn't fall for it. They should follow Fu Yinxing's lead and refuse her firmly, or this will surely happen again. If it happens a second time, they're finished. They already have the least capital, and being targeted by her means certain defeat. Meanwhile, Meng Wei stared intently at them. She looked at the noodle bowls and couldn't help but swallow her saliva. Ji Mingchuan frowned, feeling a bit lost on whether he should invite her to join them. He told himself that inviting her meant helping an opponent save money, but seeing her like that made him feel quite awkward. And besides, there was another factor. The cameras were rolling. He feared that if he seemed too heartless, netizens would bash him for being as stingy as Fu Yanqing. To be honest, the prize money mattered little. The 5 million wasn't his goal. He was after the popularity award. His dream was to sign with Nanxing Entertainment and become a professional artist. A bright future as a star was worth more than 5 million. To secure those popularity votes and avoid being called stingy, Ji Mingchuan reached into his half-box of noodles. He pulled out a pack and handed it to her, asking if she'd like to eat since she hadn't yet. Meng Wei, having finally secured a free meal, was secretly overjoyed. She pretended to be shy, asking how she could possibly accept, before quickly grabbing the noodles. Lan, who had remained silent, quietly moved her bowl away. She subtly increased the distance between herself and the other two. One has to wonder what Ji Mingchuan was thinking. Did he graduate from the School of Martyrs? At this rate, he might as well just hand her the $5 million prize right now. It's enough to make any observer sigh in frustration. It really is quite irritating to watch. Ji Mingchuan was being far too naive, and the woman had finally succeeded in freeloading off the other guests. Let's leave them to their noodles and check in on Fu Yanqing. While the three of them were stuck in the dorm eating instant meals, Fu Yanqing was sitting in a restaurant about to enjoy a massive feast. The contrast between their situations was, to put it mildly, quite staggering. A local hot pot and barbecue shop had a grand opening poster. Guess 3 words correctly and eat for free. And there he was, already seated and ready to enjoy. The poster noted a limit of 1 free meal per person, with a warning against waste. Leftovers would result in a fine. A fair policy, all things considered. Following the waiter's request, he registered his name and phone number before ordering a single portion. The viewers were dying of curiosity at this point. Everyone stayed glued to his live stream to see if he'd actually pull off this free lunch. When he finally finished eating and prepared to leave, the waiter stepped forward and informed him that his total came to 13 yuan, asking if he'd prefer to pay by phone or cash. Well, as they say, there is no such thing as a free lunch. Although 13 yuan for a full meal is a bargain, there was clearly more to the story. The other guests were eating instant noodles that cost only 1 yuan per bag, and Meng Wei hadn't spent a cent. So, by comparison, Fu Yanqing's lunch seemed like a bit of a loss. Still, a small lesson is better than a big one. Many people fall for free traps only to lose thousands. One should never take free at face value. We can't help but wonder, though, what exactly were those 13 yuan for? Fu Yanqing looked at the waiter, clearly puzzled. He had passed the word challenge for a free meal, so why was he being charged? Was it for tea and tableware? The promotion hadn't mentioned those details, and he certainly hadn't been informed. He remained silent for 2 seconds before reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a 100 yuan bill and handed it over. Only after receiving his change and a receipt did he stand up to leave. However, upon reaching the door, he didn't walk away. Instead, he took out his phone and dialed a number. "Hello, I'd like to file a report," he said calmly. Generally speaking, tableware should be provided for free. Charging for it without the consumer's consent is, quite simply, illegal. As for the tea, he hadn't even ordered any. This was a clear case of fraud. The viewers in the live stream couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but they saw him fall silent, listening intently to the official's questions. He looked down at the receipt in his hand and confirmed he had the evidence. The relevant authorities were impressively efficient. In less than 5 minutes, while he stood outside with his arms crossed, the restaurant owner personally invited him back inside the shop. Fu Yanqing remained unmoved. He wasn't looking for a simple apology. He was looking for accountability. The owner, a man named Old Meng, suppressed his annoyance and tried to explain that this wasn't a scam, but rather a common practice. "Young man, you don't understand," he said. "The whole industry does this. If you're unhappy, I'll give you another free meal next time, no fees at all." Fu Yanqing didn't budge. To him, it wasn't about 1 free meal. Old Meng, having dealt with all sorts of people for years, caught the hint. A trace of a smirk appeared in his eyes as he decided to be blunt. "All right, let's talk straight. How do you want to resolve this? What kind of practical compensation are you looking for?" He was essentially asking for his price. He was ready to pay him off to make the problem go away. With a smile, Old Meng offered 3 free meals as a way to settle things. Seeing Fu Yanqing remain silent, the owner assumed he wasn't satisfied and quickly upped the offer to 5. Fu Yanqing looked as if he wanted to say something, but hesitated. Old Meng, gritting his teeth, finally blurted out that he would give him 10 free meals just to end the dispute. To be honest, Fu Yanqing hadn't intended to ask for that, but refusing such a generous offer from a shady owner would be heartbreaking, mostly for his own wallet. 10 free meal tickets were hard to pass up. He then asked if his original payment would be refunded, to which the owner insisted it absolutely would be. It took Old Meng a moment to process what was happening. He frowned, trying to figure out if this young man was simply looking for a way out or something more. Though he looked ready to snap, the owner forced a strained, cracking smile and asked how much more compensation he wanted. Meanwhile, the viewers online began to argue. Some felt Fu Yanqing had done a great job standing up for himself, but others were starting to feel that the conversation between the two was taking a dark turn. It started to feel like a case of dog eat dog. Some wondered if there was any real difference between Fu Yanqing and the shady owner at this point. A few viewers expressed disappointment, having initially thought he was a champion of justice. However, others argued that he was simply taking back what he had lost. Wasn't it only natural to use the owner's own methods against him? That was the logic, but as we see, the nature of the situation was shifting rapidly. It started as a defense of consumer rights, but if this continued, people feared Fu Yanqing's demands for compensation might cross the line into something else. The free lunch incident was now sparking a heated debate across the internet. The stakes were rising, and the audience was completely divided on his actions. Even though the broadcast had just begun, his popularity had already soared to the top. Little did Old Ming know that every single move he made was being streamed live. The hidden camera captured everything. Fu Yanqing knew the world was watching, and he knew better than to make an unreasonable, greedy demand. He was well aware that his every word and action would be magnified online, analyzed by self-proclaimed experts and professionals looking for any legal slip-up. Still, he couldn't let this dishonest owner off too easily. After a moment of quiet reflection, he decided on a much more impactful way to resolve the matter. He suggested that the restaurant should simply provide free tableware and abolish the mandatory tea fees for all future customers. As for his own compensation, he requested only what was legally required. Nothing more, nothing less. Old Meng's face fell as he realized the implications. The owner looked troubled, but the netizens who were ready to attack Fu Yanqing suddenly felt a metaphorical slap to the face. His integrity was undeniable. Thanks to the skeptics and haters, his positive image actually improved significantly. Those who hoped to see him fail had inadvertently helped him succeed. The skeptics had handed him an immeasurable wave of popularity and a sterling image. On the surface, Old Ming agreed to the demands, deciding to just humor him for now. Following the regulations, he compensated Fu Yanqing 500 yuan, plus the 10 free meals promised earlier. As soon as he left, a nearby waiter approached. The waiter asked if they were truly going to cancel those service fees. Old Ming leaned back against his sofa, watching Fu Yanqing's departing figure with a dark, brooding expression. He muttered to himself, wondering who this kid thought he was, some hero saving the world? The idea of him speaking up for other consumers seemed utterly ridiculous to the owner. He told the waiter to keep charging everyone as usual. But just seconds later, Fu Yanqing suddenly remembered something and turned back toward Old Meng's office. He pushed the door open and poked his head inside. Old Meng, who was in the middle of drinking tea, looked up to see a face suddenly appearing in his doorway. The owner nearly sprayed his tea everywhere in shock. Fu Yanqing offered a friendly smile and mentioned he'd forgotten to remind him that this was all being live-streamed. He noted that righteous netizens everywhere would be monitoring the restaurant, so he hoped the owner would keep his word. With a cheerful grin, he finally made his exit. Meanwhile, we moved to the executive office of Nanqing Entertainment. Gu Nanji, the president, sat in her chair and turned her computer screen toward the person opposite her. The screen was displaying the money-saving challenge variety show. At that moment, it was playing the footage of Fu Yanqing securing his free lunch. After a moment, she looked at the woman sitting across from her, a woman dressed in a high-end black gown who exuded an air of noble elegance. This was Shen Yilin, who leaned back relaxed as her cold gaze fell upon the young man on the screen. After a long silence, Gu Nanji couldn't help but speak up. A playful smile curled on Nanji's lips, her face filled with an irrepressible sense of amusement as she called out to her friend, Shen Yilin. Shen Yilin didn't immediately respond, her attention remaining fixed on the broadcast. She finally raised her eyelids to give Nanji a look so cold it made the president sit up straight. Then, Yilin lowered her gaze back to the screen to watch Fu Yanqing. Nanji dismissed the chill as a mere illusion and wondered aloud if the boy had a girlfriend. She added that even if he did, it wouldn't really matter to her. She joked that she could simply wait for him to break up, as such an interesting boy was worth a bit of effort. Finally, the silent Shen Yilin seemed to have heard enough. Yilin remarked that whether he had a girlfriend or not, it was none of Nanji's business. Nanji was taken aback, wondering why her friend was being so defensive. Nanji boasted about her own charms, but then she suddenly paused as a realization hit her. She asked Yilin how she could possibly know so much about him. She teased whether Yilin had a secret crush or was perhaps already his girlfriend. Just as the words left Nanji's mouth, Shen Yilin's phone began to ring. Shen Yilin couldn't be bothered to deal with Nanji's teasing. She simply pulled out her phone and glanced at the screen, where 2 new notifications were waiting. She entered her passcode and opened the messages, which appeared to be from the Tsiyuan pharmacy. It seemed our elegant lady was on a mailing list. The first message greeted her as a distinguished member, announcing an 88% discount on all health supplements during their anniversary week. The second message invited her to a health lecture next Wednesday, featuring a famous cardiovascular specialist from the city. To be honest, it was a very specific invitation. It promised professional health consultations just by showing her phone number, and, as a final incentive, there was a small reward for attending. Apparently, she could collect a pound of free eggs after the lecture. Yilin frowned slightly, wondering when exactly she had ever signed up for a pharmacy membership. Meanwhile, the show had only been airing for a single morning, and already Fu Yanqing had taken over 4 trending topics. Some netizens were calling him the king of cheapskates. They mocked him as a high-level freeloader who even charged his fellow guests for 2 eggs. He had essentially swindled 10 free meals out of a restaurant owner. His skin was thicker than anyone could have imagined, yet other fans found him refreshingly authentic. They saw a handsome guy standing up against a black-hearted businessman. Opinions were split, with praise and criticism clashing online, but this only fueled his rising popularity. We see that controversy, as usual, was excellent for business. With official accounts sharing and liking the clips, the livestream's viewership was skyrocketing. Simultaneously, the issue of illegal restaurant fees became a heated public debate. The topic gained so much traction that relevant authorities began to take notice. 10 minutes earlier, back at the three-story dormitory provided by the production team, Meng Wei had finished her lunch and was lounging on the sofa, scrolling through her phone. She was feeling quite smug about her morning's work. She had managed to score a free instant noodle lunch from another guest, saving herself a bit of money. In her mind, she was the cleverest person in the house. She told herself that aside from Fu Yanxing, everyone else here was a bit of a fool. However, her moment of triumph was destined to be short-lived. The smile on her face froze instantly as she saw the latest updates. While they were all eating instant noodles in the dorm, Fu Yanxing was out enjoying a barbecue feast. Not only that, but he had walked away with 500 yuan and 10 free meal vouchers. But the most painful realization for her was yet to come. She remembered with a pang of regret that she had just rejected Fu Yanxing's earlier invitation. If she hadn't, she could have been sitting in that restaurant right now. She felt that a share of that 500 yuan should have been hers. Suddenly, her instant noodles tasted like ash, though something about the restaurant owner in the video looked familiar. Before she could figure out why the man looked so recognizable, the show's host, Zhao Lin, suddenly appeared to make an announcement. Zhao Lin walked toward her with a stern expression and told Meng Wei that a netizen had reported her for breaking the rules, asking her to follow him. Meng Wei looked up, completely bewildered, and insisted she hadn't broken any rules. Zhao Lin assured her the show was absolutely fair and wouldn't wrongly accuse any guest. He asked her to come with him to verify the situation. Having no choice, Meng Wei followed Zhao Lin into a small room, which was also equipped with cameras. This was to ensure the viewers could see the truth. Zhao Lin didn't waste any time and got straight to the point, telling her why she had been reported. Apparently, a viewer claimed she had been treated to a meal by an acquaintance. Meng Wei understood instantly. The only thing she had scrounged today was that bag of noodles. She calmly explained that the rules specified acquaintances, but she and that handsome guest weren't close at all. To be honest, she barely knew him. She pointed out that they hadn't even met before today. In fact, she had only learned his name by overhearing the production staff talking earlier. She reiterated that since they had never met until this morning, they couldn't possibly be considered acquaintances in any traditional sense. At most, they were just fellow guests on the same show. She argued that the production team never explicitly forbade eating food provided by other contestants. Besides, it was their first day meeting, and the man had simply been kind enough to offer her some noodles. She felt it would have been rude to refuse, especially with so many cameras rolling during a live stream. After hearing her explanation and discussing it with the director, Zhao Lin reached a verdict. It was decided that Meng Wei hadn't actually violated the rules. The team hadn't set a policy against sharing food between guests, and their relationship was indeed new. And so, Meng Wei was essentially acquitted. However, she didn't leave the room immediately. Now that her name was cleared, her confidence had returned. She sat back in her chair and spoke up with a hint of dissatisfaction. She suggested that if she could be reported for that, then someone else deserved scrutiny too. When asked who she wanted to report, she didn't hesitate to name Fu Yanxing. To her, he was becoming a bit too much of a threat. While everyone else's money was dwindling, his was somehow increasing. He had already created a 500 yuan gap right at the start of the game. Unaware that he had been reported, Fu Yanxing had just returned to the dormitory when staff members led him into that same small room. We see him enter, finding both Zhao Lin and Meng Wei waiting for him. Zhao Lin informed him that someone had reported him for a violation. Fu Yanxing tilted his head slightly. His intuition led him to look at Meng Wei. She met his gaze for less than 3 seconds before quickly looking away, appearing quite guilty, as one might expect. He asked how exactly he had broken the rules. Zhao Lin explained the report. He had gained 500 yuan, a free meal, and 10 future vouchers from that owner. We see him explain the situation to everyone, strictly detailing the cause and effect. That free meal was simply a result of participating in a restaurant activity. As for the 500 yuan and the 10 future meals, those were legal compensation voluntarily given by the owner. To be honest, it was a fair trade. He pointed out that first, he and the owner weren't acquaintances, and second, he hadn't provided any labor. How could that possibly be a violation? If anyone still doubted him, they could check the footage. He declared that if a single word was false, he would withdraw from the show himself. His upright and firm demeanor caused Meng Wei's momentum to weaken significantly. Both Zhao Lin and the director watching the feed were stunned. It turned out that right at the start of the show, Fu Yanxing had actually reported a business for violations. Talk about an unexpected opening move. Not only that, but he had secured extra compensation. The team realized this young man was incredibly savvy, perfect for their show, really. Meng Wei argued that if this wasn't a violation, they could all just profit from reporting businesses. But how was that different from a professional whistleblower? She asked what they intended to do. If it wasn't a violation, fine, but the 500 yuan and the 10 meals should at least be confiscated. She insisted he shouldn't be allowed to eat those meals, and that from now on, the rules should be updated to count such situations as violations. Fu Yinsheng didn't back down, glancing at Meng Wei. He suggested that if she could vomit up the noodles she scrounged from a guest, he might agree. He moved his chair away from her, creating a clear distance. His voice carried a hint of disdain as he told her she could begin her performance now. Meng Wei was left speechless, likely thinking he was being completely unreasonable. But the production team had a different perspective. Technically, this wasn't their profession. However, since Fu Yinsheng had already set this precedent, the team felt it would be unfair to stop others. And so, the rule was established. If the other guests could find businesses to report and gain legal compensation, they were free to do so. Of course, Meng Wei had only suggested it to target Fu Yinsheng. In reality, who could actually make a living doing this every single day? It was a sure way to offend everyone in town. After that, the matter finally drew to a close, though the tension remained thick in the air. Having failed in her attempt, Meng Wei left the small room without a word. Fu Yinsheng followed her out, heading toward the stairs. He glanced at Meng Wei sitting on the sofa. He believed a person should win by their own merit, rather than relying on petty schemes behind someone's back. Meng Wei was so infuriated by his attitude that she nearly jumped. She demanded to know what he meant and who he was calling incompetent. She snapped back, asking who he thought he was looking down on, claiming she was simply respecting the game rules. Fu Yinsheng merely let out a light snort and headed upstairs. Being treated with such disdain left Meng Wei flushed with anger. Fu Yinsheng, however, couldn't be bothered to continue the verbal spat and went to his room for a nap. We returned to Zhao Lin and the director, who waited until both Fu Yinsheng and Meng Wei had left the area before speaking. The director admitted that Fu Yinsheng was doing remarkably well. In fact, the show's reputation and quality had been elevated significantly because of him. But as the director basked in the success, he sensed something was slightly off. He turned to Zhao Lin, wondering if there was a but coming. Zhao Lin pointed out the obvious. He was currently leaving the other guests far behind. If a player is too dominant and isn't properly balanced, the show could lose its suspense and become dull. The director agreed, suggesting they have the assistant director upgrade the rules once more. The director glanced at Zhao Lin with a rather mischievous smile. Meanwhile, back at the scene, Meng Wei finally managed to calm her anger. She suddenly remembered something important and went to the third floor to knock on Ji Mingchuan's door. He opened it with a generous smile. She complained that the crew wasn't providing daily necessities, clearly trying to make things difficult for them. To be honest, she wasn't entirely wrong. Since they couldn't live without supplies, she suggested they go buy the essentials together. As her eyes sparkled, she shared a new plan. She proposed that she buy face wash while he bought toothpaste, and then they could share. That way, they could both save money for the whole month. Ji Mingchuan agreed and suggested they invite Lan as well. The two went down to the second floor, where Lan was likely mid-nap. It took a while for her to open the door. She looked exhausted and lacked energy, her expression clouded by a touch of post-nap irritability. She asked what they wanted, and they invited her to join their shopping trip. Lan's gaze shifted between Ji Mingchuan and Meng Wei for a moment. She immediately refused, telling them to go on without her before closing the door. Meng Wei thought for a moment and then made another suggestion. She told Ji Mingchuan to go get Fu Yinsheng. With more people buying different items to exchange, they could save even more money. Ji Mingchuan turned back to the third floor and knocked on Fu Yinsheng's door. At that moment, Fu Yinsheng was just about to head out himself. He opened the door and looked at Ji Mingchuan, then at Meng Wei standing behind him. He pursed his lips, sensing something was afoot. His intuition told him that Meng Wei was likely cooking up another shameless scheme. Ji Mingchuan just smiled and invited him to join them. He suggested they go buy daily necessities together and exchange different items to save money. To be honest, it was a practical plan for the budget-conscious. Fu Yinsheng admitted the method was suitable, but he wondered what would happen if a future competition created unpleasantness between them. A fair point, really. He ultimately decided it was better to buy his own supplies and refused. Meng Wei snorted, asking if he was just afraid they would take advantage of his wealth. She seemed convinced he was simply being stingy now that he had the most money among them. It was a classic case of projecting one's own motives onto others, wasn't it? Fu Yinsheng didn't care if Ji Mingchuan accepted the deal or not. He felt his kindness ended at giving advice, and he would respect their final decision. Meng Wei grit her teeth in frustration. Ji Mingchuan wanted to try persuading him again, but before he could speak, Meng Wei pulled him away. She grumbled that if he wouldn't join, they should just go call the guest who hadn't woken up yet. The two headed to the second floor and knocked on the far door. After a long wait, a weak, listless female voice drifted through the door, but the door itself remained firmly shut. Not exactly a warm welcome. Meng Wei frowned and identified herself, explaining she wanted to go shopping for supplies. A few seconds later, the person inside simply replied, "Not going." Facing a second rejection, Meng Wei and Ji Mingchuan stood in silence. The girl's voice sounded so drained it was as if she were barely clinging to life. Ji Mingchuan wanted to make a comment about her attitude, but he remembered his goal of becoming a professional idol. He had to be careful. He knew he had to watch his words and actions, lest future anti-fans dig up dirt on his behavior. A wise, if somewhat calculated move. As fate would have it, the supermarket Ji Mingchuan and Meng Wei chose was the exact same one Fu Yinxing had gone to. We see their paths cross again. The moment Meng Wei saw him, her expression soured as if he owed her a fortune. Ji Mingchuan, however, was secretly pleased by the encounter. He thought this was the perfect chance to bring up the supply exchange again. He invited Fu Yinxing to join them in the household section, but was quickly shot down. Fu Yinxing declined, stating he was going to have afternoon tea first. Meng Wei's face twisted with a hint of jealousy at his casual luxury. She told Ji Mingchuan not to bother him, noting that a man who charged for 2 eggs certainly wouldn't be treating them to tea anyway. As the pair headed to the supplies, the netizens who had been calling Fu Yinxing foolish were suddenly silenced by his next move. Their brains seemed to stall. We see him walking with clear purpose toward the pastry section. In the center of the display, there sat a white, beautifully crafted cake. We see him approach the tasting platters, picking up a toothpick to sample several pieces of small cake before moving on to the fruit tasting area. He didn't even skip the cooked food section. To be honest, we never expected that this was what he meant by having afternoon tea. Fu Yinxing has certainly opened our eyes today. He remains the same stingy master of the freebie, wandering through the aisles for a free meal. While he enjoys his afternoon tea, we return to Meng Wei and Ji Mingchuan, wondering if they'll eventually find their way to a meal as well. In the daily necessities area, Meng Wei's idea of buying facial supplies turns out to be a single bar of soap worth exactly $2. Yes, a $2 bar of soap. It was, quite literally, the cheapest option available in the entire supermarket. Ji Mingchuan mentioned that he usually uses a proper cleanser for his face, but Meng Wei simply tossed the soap into the cart with a sigh. She began a lecture on their current economic reality, asking why he would need fancy cleansers when they have a budget to maintain. She argued that the soap could double as body wash, saving them even more money. It was a practical, if somewhat extreme, strategy. She even suggested that if they bought expensive skincare now, the netizens watching would surely call them foolish. However, she then picked out a tube of toothpaste costing over $30. Ji Mingchuan found it a bit pricey, but Meng Wei insisted. She claimed they needed good toothpaste unless they wanted to spend a month live streaming with yellow teeth. Once again, he was convinced. With a giggle, she reminded him that her soap was a dual-purpose item, so he should probably buy something else to keep things fair. Ji Mingchuan suddenly felt that something wasn't quite right, but he was too polite to cause a scene or call her out directly. He suggested that if things felt unfair, he could simply buy his own bar of soap and they wouldn't have to exchange anything at all. Meng Wei's smile froze. She wondered why this man had suddenly become so difficult to manipulate, so she quickly claimed she was only joking. Ji Mingchuan just smiled and let it go, likely worried that viewers might think he was being as stingy as the others. Meanwhile, having finished his free feast, Fu Yinxing strolled leisurely toward the supplies and happened to run into the pair again. Ji Mingchuan and Meng Wei had finished their basic shopping and were heading to the skincare section when they spotted him. Ji Mingchuan smiled and invited him to buy skincare together so they could share, noting that he knew Fu Yinxing's funds were limited. Fu Yinxing simply replied that in their current situation, saving money is key, and since he doesn't use skincare products, there was no need for an exchange. Ji Mingchuan didn't push the matter, but deep down, he couldn't help but think that Fu Yinxing was truly a difficult person to get along with. We see Fu Yinxing head straight for the daily necessities area, checking products while simultaneously searching through several apps on his phone to compare prices. He finally placed an order on the most cost-effective app because he had a platform coupon that allowed him to save an additional $10. To be honest, Fu Yinxing is remarkably frugal, comparing prices across 3 different platforms just for a few basic items, a relatable sight for many of us. In the end, he walked out of the supermarket empty-handed, as the app's delivery service would bring everything he bought directly to the dormitory entrance. That evening, he headed to the Fuxiu Hot Pot and Barbecue restaurant, figuring he should use his free meal tickets quickly before the shop potentially closed down. It would be a shame if those tickets went to waste, wouldn't it? However, this time, at the entrance of the restaurant, he unexpectedly ran into the others. Lan, Meng Wei, and Ji Mingchuan were all there. He gave them a casual nod as a greeting before heading inside to enjoy his free dinner. But the other 3 weren't so lucky, as the restaurant's promotion had suddenly been cancelled. Meng Wei, looking at the storefront, felt like she was falling apart. She realized with a shock that this was actually her father's newly opened restaurant. Imagine the irony of the situation. There she was, standing at the door of her own family's shop, hoping for a free meal, only to be blocked outside by her own family's waiter. What made it worse was the realization that Fu Yinxing had been the one to report the shop, and the $500 and 10 free meals came from her father. And now, that young man was sitting inside her family's restaurant, eating a fragrant hot pot for free, while she could only stand outside. She watched him through the large glass window, and her expression became quite sour. The others, however, assumed she was just upset about the missed meal. Because they didn't know the truth, they didn't pay her much mind. Ji Mingchuan, however, spoke up with a hint of curiosity about the timing. He wondered why it was such a coincidence that the promotion ended exactly after Fu Yinsheng finished his free meal. He began to suspect something was up. He suspected Fu Yinsheng might have a special relationship with the owner to cheat his way to a win, though he was too polite to say it directly. Surprisingly, Meng Wei, who usually opposed Fu Yinsheng, suddenly spoke up to clarify that he had no relationship with the owner. Lan raised an eyebrow at this. Lan turned to look at Meng Wei, wondering why she was suddenly defending him. Of course, since it was her own family shop, Meng Wei knew the truth. We see Meng Wei scratching her brow, fully aware that her defense of Fu Yinsheng wasn't out of kindness, but a desperate move to keep the spotlight off her father's shop. She reasoned that given Fu Yinsheng's incredibly frugal lifestyle, he must be struggling financially, making it impossible for him to actually know a restaurant owner. To be honest, it was the waiter who finally cleared up the mystery, explaining that for some unknown reason, a massive wave of customers had suddenly arrived that afternoon. The owner simply couldn't handle the sudden influx of people, and with the pressure mounting, he felt he had no choice but to end the promotion early. It's one thing if people are paying, but when everything is free, a new shop just can't sustain that kind of volume, not from a cost perspective, anyway. Between the overhead and the exhausted staff, they were at a breaking point. As for why the crowd appeared, well, that was naturally due to the live stream. When Fu Yinsheng had his free lunch, the place was nearly empty, but after the stream's popularity exploded, Boss Ming found himself overwhelmed by the demand. While the crowd looking for freebies left grumbling, many others actually stayed to pay for their meals, which changed the atmosphere entirely. Boss Ming's worried frown vanished instantly, replaced by a beaming smile, though the sight of Fu Yinsheng's table was still a bit of an eyesore for him. A moment later, Boss Ming spotted a very familiar figure standing at the entrance. He realized with a start that it was his own daughter standing outside. Meng Wei saw him too. As old Meng started walking toward her with a big smile, she began frantically making faces, signaling him to stay away. Though confused, old Meng played along. Meanwhile, Lan and Ji Mingchuan, realizing the free dinner was off the table, prepared to leave in disappointment. Using the excuse of needing the restroom, Meng Wei slipped into the shop, giving her father one last meaningful look as she hurried inside. Once safely inside, she quickly removed and turned off her hidden recording equipment. Old Meng followed her, asking what on earth was going on with her strange behavior. He asked if the two people outside were her friends, wondering why she didn't invite them in to eat and see the family's new business. After checking to make sure no one was watching, she whispered that she was currently filming a reality show that was being live-streamed at that very moment. She explained that it wasn't convenient for her to be recognized as the owner's daughter while the cameras were rolling for the competition. Meng Wei explained the whole situation to old Meng, who listened in stunned silence. He finally realized she was competing against the boy who had reported him. She confirmed they were rivals. Ironically, she admitted that she had arrived intending to find a violation herself so she could report the shop for more free meals. She had hoped to pull a Fu Yinsheng and scored 20 free dinners, only to realize the shop she was trying to sabotage was her own family's. Inside the shop, old Ming suddenly frowned as a realization hit him, asking if she and the other guests were trying to use the free meal as a chance to copy Fu Yinsheng. He suspected they were all planning to report him. Meng Wei nodded truthfully, causing old Ming to clutch his chest as if his perfectly healthy heart had suddenly skipped a beat. It seemed everyone had decided to fleece the same poor sheep. Meng Wei looked at him expectantly and explained that since the crew forbade favors from acquaintances, he should host another free day. She suggested he arrange another day of free activities tomorrow so she could come and eat barbecue without it being considered a violation of the rules. She hadn't been that hungry back at the dorm, but the moment she smelled the aroma here, she couldn't resist. We see Meng Wei swallowing hard as she continued her plea. She pointed out that this would save her meal money, and with a $5 million prize on the line, she might even sign with an entertainment agency and become a star. Looking at the current flow of customers, another free day would certainly cost a fortune. However, after a moment's thought, the father's devotion took over. For the sake of his daughter, old Ming gritted his teeth and agreed to arrange another day of free activities tomorrow, which, to be honest, was quite a sacrifice. After settling the plan with old Ming, Meng Wei was about to leave when she suddenly smiled and asked if he could find a way to make Fu Yinsheng break the rules. She wanted him disqualified. She repeated her request, asking her father to find any possible way to trick Fu Yinsheng into a violation that would get him kicked out. Because of the compensation old Ming had given him, Fu Yinsheng now had a massive lead in funds, making it incredibly difficult for her to win fairly. She noted that any violation would result in his immediate removal, though she warned her father not to contact him openly since the cameras were still rolling. Old Ming assured her that private contact would be easy, as everyone who participated in the free promotion had to register as a member and leave their contact information. He planned to grab Fu Yinsheng's number from the desk later, intending to lure him into a trap and report him. With that settled, Meng Wei prepared to depart. As she walked out of the shop, her icy gaze lingered on Fu Yinsheng, who was still busy eating his mutton, for a long time before she finally turned away. One might wonder if she was crying from hunger, but looking at that sharp glare, it's more likely she wanted to toss Fu Yinsheng into the boiling pot instead. To save money, Meng Wei had walked all the way from the dorm, and now she had to head back on an empty stomach. Halfway there, the physical toll began to show. She found herself hungry and thirsty, and as she passed a small restaurant, she couldn't help but stop. And who could blame her, really? The aroma was simply too much. The scent wafting from the kitchen was incredibly tempting. After hesitating for a moment, she finally went inside and ordered a portion of fried rice. She sat down, waiting for her meal and a bottle of water to wash it down. Between the fried rice and the soda, her savings were gone. It was a classic case of ineffective budgeting. Meanwhile, we see Fu Yinxing finishing his meal and walking back to the dorm. He didn't run into any of the other guests on his way. In his mind, it didn't really matter what they were up to, as he could check their latest updates on his phone tomorrow. This would allow him to judge if his ranking was under any real threat. With that thought, he went straight to his room to rest, knowing he needed to recharge his energy. Only by being in top form could he face tomorrow's battle for savings. Before heading to sleep, he picked up his phone and began scouring various apps and brand websites. After half an hour of searching, a satisfied smile appeared on his face. At the same time, the staff compiled the statistics for the 5 guests' remaining assets and posted them online. The daily rankings were officially released for everyone to see. In second place was Feng Yu with a balance of 100 yuan. Third place went to Enlan, who had 48.8 yuan remaining. Then came Meng Wei. Meng Wei held fourth place with 48.55 yuan, while Ji Mingchuan trailed in fifth with 26.4 yuan. Meanwhile, at the Interstellar Club, Shin Yiming sat on a sofa, looking down at his phone. He was surrounded by several wealthy socialites, but his attention was fixed entirely on his screen. The screen displayed a text message he had sent a week ago that had never received a reply. Suddenly, 2 messages from an unknown number popped up. The message read, "I am Old Meng from Fushi Garden. I think your image and temperament are excellent, and I've thought of a mutually beneficial business deal." It continued, "Are you interested? I provide the money, you provide the effort." Beside him, a man named Gu noticed Yiming's complex expression as he stared at the phone. Unable to contain his curiosity and hoping to catch some juicy gossip about Yiming, Gu leaned in to take a quick look at the messages. He joked, asking if the Zhongjing group had really reached the point where President Shun had to personally go out and hustle for money. Yiming turned to look at him. He gave a casual, nonchalant smile and asked what would happen if he told Gu's father that the precious porcelain vase in his study had actually been replaced years ago. He wondered aloud if the elder Mr. Gu would help him out as a reward for the tip, which would certainly save Yiming from having to hustle for a living. Feeling the weight of a very real threat, Gu felt a chill run down his spine. He forced a smile that looked more like a grimace and tried to play it off. He told Yiming not to be like that, suggesting they were like family and that Yiming should just speak up if he needed any help at all. There was no need to involve his father. Yiming looked at him lazily and added that he also happened to remember that Aunt Gu's prized bottle of red wine, which she had been carefully preserving, had also been swapped out long ago. Gu quickly surrendered, realizing Yiming wasn't the type to suffer even a small loss. Gu, who was clearly feeling the pressure, grumbled internally before speaking seriously, asking if Yiming was truly in trouble or if the sender had simply messaged the wrong person. Yiming dismissed the concern, noting that he wasn't even able to get a meal from Boss Meng. Meanwhile, we see that Old Meng had actually been worried and tried calling. Since Yiming was filming the show and couldn't speak, Old Meng sent a text instead. Now, he sat there, staring at the lack of a reply with a deeply furrowed brow. It seemed the young man was quite cautious, meaning Old Meng would have to be even more persuasive. The next morning, the livestream's main interface updated with a new reveal. The results for yesterday's popularity poll were officially out. In the Savings Great Battle popularity rankings, Fu Yinxing took first place, followed by Enlan in second. Third place went to Feng Yu, fourth to Ji Mingchuan, and fifth to Meng Wei. The bullet chat immediately exploded with reactions, shocked that Fu Yinxing had taken the top spot. Some wondered if he had hired bots, questioning if the numbers were even real. Others argued it was perfectly normal, as he and Meng Wei had left the strongest impressions so far. However, many viewers admitted they didn't want to vote for Meng Wei, feeling she was a bit too crafty for their tastes. As for Ji Mingchuan, the sentiment was quite different. Fans felt that if Mingchuan weren't so kind-hearted, they would have given him all their votes. After all, his looks were exactly their type, which is a powerful motivator, indeed. It was a shame, really. While the others made sense, people were baffled by Feng Yu taking third place, considering he hadn't even shown his face yet. The consensus seemed to be that his mystery was his greatest asset, fueling the audience's curiosity. As the results circulated, the guests themselves began checking the rankings online. We returned to the dorms, specifically the room at the far end of the 3rd floor. After a simple morning routine, Fu Yinxing headed down to the kitchen to fry 2 eggs. By noon, he returned to the Fushi Garden Hot Pot and Barbecue restaurant. The shop wasn't as crowded as yesterday, likely because Boss Meng had canceled the previous promotion. However, we see that the riddle guessing for a free meal sign had been hung up once again. Not long after Yinxing arrived, Meng Wei appeared at the scene as well. Once again, she found herself blocked at the entrance because she couldn't solve the riddle. To be honest, having one's IQ tested just to eat barbecue seems a bit excessive. She wondered why Old Meng couldn't just set a simpler question or perhaps slip her a cheat sheet. Deep down, she was grumbling quite fiercely about the unfairness of it all. With a dark expression, she stood outside for nearly an hour. By the time Yinsheng walked out, fully satisfied and well-fed, she still hadn't even managed to step inside. It was an incredibly awkward moment. It turns out that even having a backdoor connection doesn't help if you can't get through the front gate first. Standing at her own family's doorstep for the second time without getting a meal was enough to make Meng Wei want to give up entirely. But then, something even more mysterious happened. The next day, everyone's asset balances remained exactly the same. Not a single cent had been spent. Yinsheng had his eggs and free meals, while Enlan had her own plans. Ji Mingchuan was sticking to his instant noodles, and once again, Meng Wei shamelessly managed to leech a meal off him. As for the mysterious guest, Feng Yu, she remained completely unseen. She hadn't spent a single cent, maintaining the same air of mystery as yesterday. Compared to the mundane routines of the other four, Feng Yu's unusual behavior immediately caught the attention of the netizens. They wondered if she was some kind of hermit, never leaving or spending. Some joked she was in seclusion, while others worried if she was even okay in there. To be honest, the concern was starting to feel quite real. Others joked she was practicing some dark, forbidden arts. Regardless, she had successfully piqued everyone's interest, earning a flood of popularity votes. People are naturally drawn to the unknown, filled with fantasy and expectation. By the third day of the broadcast, Feng Yu's popularity skyrocketed. She shot up to second place, even threatening Yinsheng's top spot. It wasn't just the netizens. Even the other guests were getting curious. Someone who could stay hidden and spin nothing for so long was surely a master of frugality with deep, hidden depths. Such low-profile individuals are often the chosen ones, perhaps preparing a grand move to catch everyone off guard. It was enough to cause a bit of a crisis. However, in the dead of night, just as the curiosity about Feng Yu reached its peak, a faint siren began to echo outside the dorms. It sounded like an ambulance, and it was getting closer. Soon, the sound of panicked footsteps could be heard echoing through the halls downstairs. Yinsheng quickly dressed and headed down, only to see paramedics carrying a stretcher out from the second floor. Lying on the stretcher was a slender, tall young woman. Since the room at the end of the second floor belonged to Feng Yu, the situation became clear. He spotted Enlan standing there in her pajamas and hurried over to ask her exactly what had happened to their mysterious neighbor. Enlan rubbed her temples, her voice full of helpless exasperation. It turns out this woman had missed 9 meals in 3 days. She had quite literally starved herself into a state of total unconsciousness. Enlan had been the one to call for help. So much for being a chosen one or a hidden master. That theory was retracted immediately. As the paramedics loaded Feng Yu into the ambulance, they turned to the other 4 guests and asked who would be accompanying her. Going along meant paying the medical fees. While everyone had looked worried a moment ago, the mention of money made them all hesitate. They all stood there in silence, exchanging glances without saying a word. Finally, Meng Wei turned to the assistant director behind the camera, suggesting this was a matter for the production team. She argued that since this happened during the show, the team should be responsible. The assistant director frowned, reminding them that they had all signed an agreement before filming began. The contract stated that any issues caused by personal reasons within the show were the sole responsibility of the guests themselves. That was the official line, anyway. In reality, the director had intercepted the paramedics when they arrived, instructing them to ask that specific question about who would pay. Regardless of whether the other 4 followed, Feng Yu was going to the hospital. As soon as the director finished speaking, Yinsheng turned and ran back upstairs without a word. The netizens exploded instantly. While 3 guests remained, one had seemingly chosen to flee, and that person was their top-ranked star, Yinsheng. The comments flooded in, asking if he was really so afraid of paying the medical fees that he just ran away. It certainly looked that way. Was he truly so terrified of the bill that he abandoned his neighbor? It was a disappointing sight, to say the least. It seems that when faced with money, the uglier side of human nature tends to reveal itself. Yinsheng's reputation was taking a massive hit. Viewers expressed their heartbreak, swearing they would never vote for him again or watch any show he appeared in. Some even vowed never to enter his stream again. Meanwhile, Enlan and Meng Wei stood perfectly still, neither of them offering a response. They weren't exactly rushing to volunteer their wallets. Ji Mingchuan actually wanted to go, but he only had about 200 yuan in his pocket, hardly enough for a hospital deposit. He turned to the 2 women. He suggested that since Yinsheng had left, the 3 of them should pool their money to get Feng Yu to the hospital first. Meng Wei was not impressed. She shot him a look, her teeth practically itching with annoyance. If he wanted to play the saint, he could do it himself without dragging her into it. Enlan didn't react as strongly as Meng Wei. She simply remained silent, maintaining the low-profile, quiet image she had cultivated over the last 3 days. Seeing their indifference, Ji Mingchuan frowned deeply. He reminded them that this was a matter of life and death, not just a game. He asked if money was really more important than a human life. Seeing that Enlan and Meng Wei still wouldn't speak, he felt a secret surge of joy. He felt he had made the right move. After all, in a group competing for a 5 million yuan prize, who would naturally be noble enough to give it up for a stranger? Their cold-bloodedness was the perfect foil for his own kindness. He was certain his popularity ranking would jump from 4th to 1st by tonight. Acting as if he couldn't bear their attitude, Ji Mingchuan continued in a tone heavy with accusation, questioning their lack of compassion. Ji Mingchuan continued his performance, likely assuming that Yinxing had fled for good and wouldn't be coming back to challenge his narrative. But just as he turned his head, he saw Yinxing running back downstairs, barely even out of breath and completely ignoring Ji Mingchuan's presence. Yinxing followed the paramedics directly into the ambulance and left, leaving the other 3 guests standing there in a state of total confusion. The viewers began to wonder if Yinxing had simply run back to his room to grab his wallet, a realization that made some commoners regret their hasty words. At the Jiang City Hospital, Yinxing finished paying the fees, folded the receipt neatly into his pocket, and sat down to wait for Feng Yu to wake up. Fortunately, they had arrived in time. It was nothing a little glucose couldn't fix. About half an hour later, there was finally some movement on the bed. Yinxing watched as she struggled to open her heavy eyelids. With a voice slightly raspy from fatigue, he asked her how she was feeling. Feng Yu turned toward him, her voice weak as she thanked him for bringing her to the hospital. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything. He clarified that it was actually Lan who found her and called the emergency services, and that he had simply covered the initial medical deposit. Seeing that she was truly out of danger, he calmly pulled out the receipt and reminded her that she would eventually need to reimburse him. He couldn't help but point out the irony. In an attempt to save money on 3 days of food, she had skipped 9 meals and ended up in the ER. The total bill for the ambulance and treatment came to 250 yuan, a rather expensive way to save money, to be honest. He placed the receipt in her hand with a quiet sigh, reminding her that while the prize money was important, her health was far more valuable. After all, winning a prize only to spend it all on medical bills would be a tragic waste. Suddenly, Feng Yu's eyes began to well up with tears. Yinxing watched her, feeling a bit out of his depth. He wasn't exactly an expert at comforting people, especially someone as fragile as she seemed now. Feng Yu sniffled, admitting that in 20 years of life, a complete stranger was the first person to actually show concern for her well-being. She looked at him with a complex expression, confessing that she hadn't joined the show for the prize, but because her family had forced her to. Apparently, they resented her for spending too much money at home. It was a sad realization, and Yinxing couldn't help but feel a flicker of pity. Trying to offer some comfort, he remarked that it was perfectly normal for a child to spend a little money while living at home. Feng Yu nodded eagerly, finally finding someone who seemed to understand her, and casually mentioned she only spent a few million a day on games. She listed her expenses casually, buying cars, limited edition sneakers, and spending tens of millions. Nothing major, really, but her family still wasn't satisfied. They resented her spending habits, so they forced her onto this show to experience living on a mere 500 yuan for an entire month. She lamented that they didn't care about her happiness, while Yinxing's expression simply froze at the mention of a few million. Tens of millions? That is a rather niche definition of small spending that left him stunned for a good 10 seconds. It seemed Feng Yu was less of a contestant, and more of a wealthy socialite slumming it for a reality check. Clearly, she didn't need emotional support, she needed a dose of reality. He realized then that he shouldn't have empathized with this heiress, nor should he have wasted his breath trying to comfort a literal princess. Because in this moment, he felt like the only true clown in the room. If anyone actually needed comforting here, it was him. How could a man who hesitates to spend a few hundred yuan possibly sympathize with a girl who drops millions without blinking? He simply couldn't. While he was still processing this absurdity, he heard Feng Yu speak up again, looking somewhat embarrassed as she made a request. She looked at him and asked if, considering how miserable she was, he could perhaps give her a discount on the medical bill. It was a bold ask, especially since she claimed the 5 million yuan grand prize was absolutely vital to her future. Apparently, that prize money would determine her status in the gaming world. So, all that emotional buildup from before was just a tactic to gain his sympathy and dodge a medical bill. Her true goal was always that 5 million yuan prize. Yinxing's gaze turned cold. He scoffed, wondering if she'd prefer a bone-breaking discount instead. She, undeterred, suggested that even a 50% discount would work. He couldn't believe it. He had opened up to her, and she was playing games with him. He asked if she knew what happened to the last person who tried to cheat him. Feng Yu didn't know, of course. She had seen the news about the barbecue shop owner, who ended up paying him 10 meals and 500 yuan. Although her family was currently restricting her funds, she had another way to make it up to Yinxing. To be honest, it was a creative solution. She spoke quickly, promising that if he helped her this once, she would introduce him to her aunt once the show was over. She insisted her aunt was not only incredibly wealthy, but also exceptionally beautiful, repeating the offer to ensure he understood the value. She emphasized the wealth and beauty one more time with a sly grin. Since she lacked financial freedom herself, she was apparently willing to trade her relatives. Her logic was simple. If she could compensate Yinxing with someone who already had financial freedom, he would be set for life, which, naturally, meant she would be too. As the matchmaker, she expected a reward, ensuring she'd never have to worry about her family cutting off her allowance again. It was a flawless plan in her mind. While Feng Yu was busy calculating these little schemes in her head, we see Yinxing watching her with a look of pure, unadulterated judgment. He remained completely unmoved, his eyes showing a hint of disgust as he told her plainly that he wasn't interested in women who came with nieces. Undeterred, she suggested he wait until she inherited the family business to compensate him, though she admitted he might be waiting quite a long time. Since her father was still in excellent health, she promised that once she took over, she could buy him anything he wanted, no matter the price. She claimed that even 50 million yuan would be nothing to her then. Yinsheng just glanced at her, wondering if her family was in the bakery business. Because, to be honest, she was exceptionally skilled at serving up pie-in-the-sky promises. He stood up and walked over to her side, wearing a thin smile. He told her firmly that the medical fee wouldn't be reduced by a single cent, adding that if she tried to cross him, he wouldn't mind her staying in the hospital longer. His voice was calm and lacked any obvious emotion, yet for some reason, Feng Yu felt a sudden, inexplicable chill run down her spine. Up close, she couldn't help but notice how handsome he was, easily rivaling those perfect, 360-degree male characters from her video games. Feng Yu blinked and quickly turned her head away to avoid his gaze, her mind momentarily scrambled by his proximity and that sharp comparison. She finally relented, looking away as she muttered that she understood and that the money was back in her room. A wise choice, all things considered. She promised to pay him as soon as they returned. Yinxing nodded with satisfaction, warning her not to try any more clever tricks. He only wanted the cash. Meanwhile, the netizens watching the stream were losing their minds, commenting that Yinxing's demands sounded less like a doctor and more like a kidnapper. Some joked that they expected his next line to be a threat to harm the hostage if the ransom wasn't paid immediately. He was certainly focused. This man was truly immune to persuasion, caring for nothing but the money. He was, as they say, a man with a very specific set of priorities. The viewers wondered if Feng Yu was just there for comic relief, considering she was willing to sell out her own aunt for a 5 million yuan prize. No one expected that, in the end, it would be the notoriously stingy Yinsheng who actually stepped up to cover the initial medical expenses. Between the wealthy aunt and the hospital bill, the chat was buzzing. But for now, the pursuit of money and beautiful relatives would have to wait. After the 4-drip was finished, Yinxing didn't take Feng Yu back to the dormitory immediately, but instead led her to a nearby place. We see them arrive at a porridge shop, where Yinxing notices a customer using a membership card at the counter and decides to inquire. He asks the clerk about the benefits of joining, and she explains that members receive a 10 yuan voucher for late-night snacks. However, the voucher is only valid after midnight. Checking his phone, Yinxing sees it's just past 12, a stroke of luck, he feels. When he asks how to join, the clerk mentions a 100 yuan deposit. He hesitates, thinking a free membership would have been much better. To be honest, the idea of paying 100 yuan up front just to save 10 later didn't exactly sit well with his frugal nature. Still, he brought Feng Yu here because her current condition requires healthy, nutritious food. Otherwise, he wouldn't have bothered. Given his current financial situation, spending money on light meals that don't even keep you full isn't ideal. He orders porridge and egg custard. After they finish eating and return to the dorm, Feng Yu pays him back every cent of the medical fees and the previous debt. Back in his room, he neatly folds the 500 yuan and tucks it away. The next morning, he boils 2 extra eggs for his patient. He remembers that during last night's meal, the young lady was kind enough to offer him half of her custard. He has a conscience, after all. He wasn't about to snatch food from a sick person. Touched by the simple gesture of 2 boiled eggs, Feng Yu becomes quite emotional. She claims that besides Lan, he is the person who treats her best. He feels that if he doesn't stop her, she might propose marriage next. After breakfast, Yinxing heads out. Feng Yu quickly washes her face and follows him, mostly because she knows she can score a free meal. Suddenly, a young man in a mascot costume stops them, asking if they have time to fill out a survey in exchange for a bottle of water. With a slight smile, Yinxing agrees. He takes the form and scans it. It appears to be some sort of market research for a new product. Just as he is about to write, Feng Yu's voice pops up from behind him, advising him not to fill out such personal forms. She warns him that these things often lead to privacy leaks, resulting in endless spam messages and annoying harassment calls. She explains that companies often sell this collected data to third parties. Yinxing just gives a sudden, knowing smile and tells her it's fine. He understands her logic perfectly, but he isn't worried. After all, he isn't using his own information. He's filling it out with the scammer's details. He explains that he isn't worried at all, as the phone numbers he previously left at pharmacies and barbecue shops all belong to a scammer. A week ago, a message from a strange number was intercepted by his anti-fraud app, claiming to be from the prestigious Zhongjing Group. The message offered a high-paying position as a CEO's personal assistant, easy work, no degree required, provided one could travel abroad long-term. It invited him to reply if interested. Now, the Zhongjing Group is a famous enterprise that his college classmates would kill to join. One of his classmates had bragged for ages just for getting an external position there. At first, he thought the app's interception was a mistake. He actually went through the trouble of finding the Zhongjing Group's HR number online to check. When he called, the truth came out. The HR department confirmed they weren't hiring for that role, and the phone number that sent the text had no connection to their personnel office. The HR representative kindly warned him that many criminals impersonate company staff to carry out scams these days. Though he hadn't expected much, he felt a tiny bit of disappointment. Meanwhile, the viewers watching the stream were starting to get anxious. They agreed with Feng Yu. You should never fill out personal information casually, or your privacy will be leaked in an instant. They felt Yinxing's guard was far too low. Even after Feng Yu warned him so clearly, he just brushed it off as if it were nothing. He told her there was no need to be so tense. To be honest, his casual confidence was either very brave or very reckless. He suggested just downloading an anti-fraud app, but the viewers argued that one shouldn't rely entirely on technology. After all, automated systems have loopholes, and some scammers are incredibly sophisticated. Personal vigilance is the only real defense. We see that after walking for a while, Feng Yu had grown quite thirsty. Her initial urge to argue further suddenly vanished. Upon seeing the rows of free mineral water, she looked at the young man in the mascot costume, cleared her throat, and changed her tune. She asked for a form of her own. As the mascot handed it to her, he glanced at Yinxing and casually asked if they were a couple. Feng Yu's hand froze mid-signature. Having never been in a relationship, the sudden, teasing question caught her completely off guard. Her cheeks turned red almost instantly. Yinxiang, however, remained perfectly composed and calmly told the man they were not. We returned to the dormitory, where Yinxing's unexpected actions from the night before had left the other 3 guests struggling to sleep. The elaborate plot he carefully planned ended up merely setting the stage for Yinxing, who secured the top popularity spot for the 4th day in a row. Meanwhile, Enlan and Meng Wei were being torn apart by netizens. While Enlan held up okay, that video of her gossiping behind Yinxing's back became a viral joke. Meng Wei was equally baffled, convinced that Yinxing was far too calculating, as his actions the previous night felt like a physical slap to their collective faces. She was certain the online comments were now entirely one-sided, leaving the 3 of them to serve as nothing more than villainous foils to Yinxing's brilliance. Realizing they couldn't let this continue, she decided it was time for old Meng to step up his efforts in the task of seducing Fu Yinxing. On the other side of town, after collecting the free mineral water, Yinxing headed toward the city center to scout the area for a while. During his walk, he noticed that Feng Yu, who had been trailing him, had suddenly vanished, but he didn't bother looking for her. He reasoned that a rational adult wouldn't just disappear, and besides, they weren't teammates. They were rivals in an individual competition. As he passed a storefront, he paused to take a closer look before pulling out his phone to record a few notes, then headed to a local barbecue shop. After 2 more meals today, he would only have 3 free meal tickets left, which meant he was set until the day after tomorrow at noon. By the noon of the 6th day, his free tickets finally ran out, much to old Meng's relief, as he finally wouldn't have to see Yinxing anymore. That evening, Yinxing finished his last 3 eggs. From the look of things, he had officially reached the end of his supplies. He had reached the point where he would have to spend money or go hungry, just as Enlan also ran out of her instant noodles. She was now facing the difficult choice of which flavor to buy next, though after 6 straight days, she was utterly sick of noodles regardless of the flavor. Ji Mingchuan's noodles had long since been finished by Meng Wei, forcing him to buy a new box, so he still had a small surplus for now. As for Feng Yu, she simply stayed in her room and refused to come out, which was a choice in itself, we suppose. However, the production team soon announced that they had an important update that everyone needed to hear. Today, they would be welcoming 5 high-profile gold-tier sponsors who would be joining the 5 guests to experience a day of frugal living. Meng Wei immediately raised her hand to ask a question, clearly curious about how this new dynamic would work. She wanted to know if these wealthy sponsors would be bringing their own money along, a question the production team found quite excellent. The rules stated that these 5 sponsors couldn't carry a single cent, meaning every expense they incurred today would have to be covered entirely by our guests. The news hit them hard. Life was already difficult enough, and now they had 5 extra mouths to feed, mouths they couldn't afford to offend. It was a desperate situation, and even the netizens began to protest on their behalf, feeling the production team was treating the guests with zero mercy. To be honest, the team was being quite ruthless, forcing the contestants to support 5 more people when they could barely afford to feed themselves. It felt as though they were being pushed to their limits, proving that the $5 million grand prize wouldn't be won easily. We can't help but wonder if Yinxing will be stingy enough to drag his sponsor along to hunt for more free handouts. Probably not, as these sponsors were high-profile figures they couldn't afford to upset. They would have to be treated with the utmost care. After all, if a sponsor became unhappy and kicked a guest off the show, their chance at the prize money would vanish instantly. Inviting sponsors to experience this frugal lifestyle alongside the guests was the latest game upgrade dreamed up by the assistant director. By constantly creating new difficulties for the participants, the team ensured the show remained interesting for the audience. Zhao Lin noticed the gloomy expressions on everyone's faces and told them, with a smile, to look a bit more cheerful. She reminded them they were live and the sponsors were watching, noting that in other shows, guests would beg for a chance to be near such powerful people. You should feel honored, she suggested, but Meng Wei could only manage a forced smile, pointing out that this wasn't like other variety shows. We see Ming Wei questioning how they could possibly compare, but Zhao Lin simply shrugged, asking what the difference really was. She argued that some shows provide no budget at all, leaving guests to rely entirely on their own hands to provide food and clothing. The guests argued they wanted to work, but the production rules strictly forbade them from trading their labor for any kind of profit. In this game, using physical labor to gain an advantage was considered a violation of the rules, a point Zhao Lin made very clear. Her gaze swept over the 5 guests as she explained they had to rely on their exclusive money-saving secrets to win the prize. The opportunity to win was right in front of them, but how they achieved it would depend entirely on their own ingenuity. Currently, the guest with the least amount of money is Ji Mingchuan, who has only 222 yuan left to host his incoming sponsor. Well, in that case, he'll have to put on quite a show. Breaking his silence, Yinxing suddenly asks if they are all going to host the sponsors together. Naturally, the answer is no. Instead, they must complete a task and then, based on their ranking, choose a sponsor to host individually. This way, everyone spends their own money, which is much fairer. We can't help but wonder if all the sponsors will want to be paired with Fu Yanxing. After all, with everyone's assets now transparent, who wouldn't want to spend the day with the resident millionaire? It seems almost certain. Fu Yanxing is currently the little tycoon of the show, and any sponsor would likely prefer his company to enjoy a bit of luxury for a change. Yes, the 5 sponsors are surely eyeing Yanxing, hoping for a day of fine dining and comfort. But as we've seen, things in this game are rarely that simple. That might not be the case at all. While Yanxing is indeed the wealthiest guest at the moment, that only matters if he is actually willing to spend his money. Given his legendary stinginess, the sponsors might be in for a surprise. Zhao Lin then points toward the door, announcing that the task is about to begin. The rule is simple. Whoever grabs the card from the staff member first gets the first pick. The staff member holding those precious cards is already waiting outside. Standing just outside the open dormitory gate, the staff member is visible about 100 meters away. The 5 guests follow Zhao Lin's finger, realizing what this entails. It's essentially a 100-meter dash. Zhao Lin asks if there are any more questions, noting that if they are ready, they can start right now. While Ji Mingchuan takes off like a professional sprinter, the other 4 guests start at a leisurely, almost indifferent pace. To them, competing for a sponsor seems pointless. Why waste energy just to win another mouth to feed? Meanwhile, the 5 sponsors watching the live feed from their cars are starting to feel a bit insulted. Aside from Ji Mingchuan, is no one really going to fight for us? Even if they don't want to, they could at least pretend to try for the sake of appearances. This group of guests is truly difficult to handle. Zhao Lin watches them walk slowly for a few steps before suddenly remembering a very important detail. She casually mentions that the top 3 finishers will receive a special hosting subsidy from the production team. It was the magic word they were waiting for. There's no time to ask how much the subsidy is. Zhao Lin and the netizens watching the stream see nothing but a blur as the guests suddenly find their motivation. The sight is hilarious. It seems money really is the only thing that can move these 4. One moment they were dragging their feet, and the next they were flying. One second they were refusing to compete because they didn't want an extra mouth to feed, and the next, the promise of cash changed everything. They are running so fast you'd expect their shoes to catch fire. To be honest, these guests are some of the most shamelessly practical people we've ever seen. Ji Mingchuan never expected that despite his head start, he would be overtaken so ruthlessly. He can only feel the wind as the others streak past him. It was as if a wicked wind had suddenly swept past him, leaving him in the dust. He was baffled. Weren't they just refusing to compete for the sponsors a moment ago? In the end, Feng Yue took first place, followed by Yansheng in second, Anlan in third, Meng Wei in fourth, and poor Ji Mingchuan in fifth. Feng Yue caught his breath, turned back with his long strides, and handed the first place card to Zhao Lin, who accepted it with a knowing smile. She asked if he was excited to finally choose a sponsor, but Feng Yue, ever the pragmatist, simply leaned in and asked about the money. He wanted to know exactly how much the subsidy was. Zhao Lin, wondering if these guests cared for anything but cash, pulled a bill from her pocket. She presented the official hosting subsidy from the production team. Feng Yue looked at the 5 yuan bill in his hand and couldn't help but laugh in disbelief. He asked, quite reasonably, who on earth could host a guest on just 5 yuan? Zhao Lin told him he was free to decline it if he wished. But as she reached to take it back, Feng Yue quickly pulled it away. 5 yuan is still money, after all, and something is always better than nothing. Yanxing also received his 5 yuan, staring at the bill with a look that clearly said the production team was being incredibly cheap. Meanwhile, those who got nothing, like Meng Wei and Ji Mingchuan, felt a twinge of envy. The sponsors would be assigned by drawing lots, following the order of the race results. This part of the process made Ji Mingchuan feel much better. When the results were finally announced, he felt as though his luck had truly peaked. He had drawn the representative from Star Entertainment, and he was so moved he nearly cried. As for Yansheng, he drew the Zhongjing group. In the car prepared by the team, Xin Yiling watched the live stream and saw the result. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. The other 4 sponsors looked at her with a hint of pity. Once all the guests had finished drawing their respective sponsors for the day, Zhao Lin told everyone to go and get ready. She promised to notify them the moment the sponsors arrived at the gate. As soon as she finished speaking, Ji Mingchuan rushed upstairs to his room. He was determined to give himself a complete makeover for the occasion. Mengwei, despite her initial reluctance to spend money on another person, had a change of heart. She told herself that as a daughter of a wealthy family, she had to maintain appearances. She even went so far as to use her precious 1 yuan bar of soap to very solemnly wash her hair. However, the serious preparation of Ji Mingchuan and Meng Wei stood in stark contrast to the others. Feng Yue and Enlon simply returned to their rooms, crawled back under their blankets, and went straight back to sleep. They simply crawled back into their blankets to catch up on sleep, looking as if they didn't care who showed up, showing no respect for the sponsors at all. Then we look at our money-saving expert, Yinsheng, who sat on his bed scrolling through his phone, looking quite busy, though no one knew with what. When the sponsors were finally invited to the scene by the staff, the guests were notified. Ji Mingchuan, eager to make a good impression on Star Entertainment, rushed downstairs as fast as he could. In the lobby stood 5 stunning women, and his eyes immediately landed on one of them. She was tall and exuded an air of nobility. He told himself she looked dangerous and that he should stay away, hoping she wasn't the boss of Star Entertainment. To be honest, she was simply too beautiful. He feared that spending too much time with her would make him lose his self-control. If that happened, instead of rising to the top, he might end up as cannon fodder, ruining his career over a woman. It was a risk he felt he couldn't afford. While Ji Mingchuan was silently praying in his heart, the host, Zhao Lin, walked over to the first middle-aged woman on the left. The boss of Star Entertainment had originally agreed to come, but for some unknown reason, changed their mind and sent the vice president instead. Deep down, Ji Mingchuan was incredibly excited, but to avoid looking unsophisticated or inexperienced to his superior, he feigned a calm composure. He offered a gentle smile and greeted Mr. Li. The vice president smiled back at Ji Mingchuan, appearing remarkably approachable and kind. This allowed Ji Mingchuan to relax quite a bit. He asked if the man had eaten breakfast, to which the sponsor replied that the production team said the guests would be the ones making the arrangements. This was the moment Ji Mingchuan had been waiting for, a perfect chance to show off. He immediately offered to take him to breakfast, telling him he could order whatever he liked, as long as it was within his means. The production team really was being quite stingy, not even providing breakfast for the sponsors, which, naturally, left the burden on the guests. It seemed Ji Mingchuan was truly prepared to spend every last cent he had to entertain his sponsor, and knowing him, he just might do it. Meanwhile, we see the woman standing in the middle. Within 3 minutes, everyone watching wanted to know everything about her. Soon, Enlon and the others came downstairs to collect their sponsors. Meng Wei was paired with Mr. Sun from the Fortune 500 company, Tianqing Insurance. She approached him with a polite greeting, introducing herself as the daughter of a wealthy family who knew how to maintain appearances. She greeted him warmly, saying, "Hello, my name is Meng Wei, hoping to start this partnership on the right foot." Meng Wei greeted him politely, but then we see Xiao Cheng from the Huafu group stepping forward to introduce himself. It was a bit jarring, really. One had to wonder if everyone at Huafu Group was quite this humble and soft-spoken. He didn't exactly carry the commanding aura of a major sponsor, did he? One would expect at least a little bit of professional swagger. Compared to Xiao Cheng, it almost felt as if Enlon was the one acting as the high-powered sponsor in this dynamic. Perhaps Xiao Cheng was simply being approachable, but the contrast between Meng Wei's and Enlan's groups was like night and day. The atmosphere was polarized as Enlon leaned in, whispering to her partner in a voice meant only for the two of them. She was speaking so quietly that only they could hear, creating a private bubble amidst the chaos of the production. Shen Yining gave her a cool, detached look and asked why she had even come here. It was a fair question, all things considered. She suddenly remembered that Shen Yining had recently taken over Zhongjing Group, but he simply told her it was none of her business. Deep down, she suspected his aunt might be here to build the company's image or perhaps to boost her own public profile for once. It seemed she had made a rare exception to appear on camera, showing a completely different side of herself to the viewers. Enlon realized her aunt was paired with Fu Yinsheng and immediately asked for a favor, not to make things difficult for him. She even went as far as asking her to look after him, noting that he'd been quite kind to her and even paid her medical bills. On top of that, he had even gone out of his way to boil eggs for her during those first few difficult days. She added a final, strange request. Her aunt must never reveal their true relationship. Naturally, the aunt wanted to know why. The answer was simple, because he didn't like her. Shen Yining's brow twitched slightly at that, wondering what she had ever done to the man. When pressed for details, Enlon explained that he specifically said he didn't like women who had nieces. A very specific deal-breaker, indeed. It was possible the emphasis was entirely on the niece part. Her aunt's voice turned icy as she prepared a sharp retort. She calmly stated that if that was the case, she could very easily become a woman who didn't have a niece at all. After all, she wasn't particularly keen on having a niece who managed to starve 9 times in 3 days. It was simply too embarrassing. Enlon understood perfectly well what her aunt meant. She was being cast aside for being an embarrassment. How could this woman be so heartless? They shared a blood relation. After all, one doesn't simply discard family. Enlon argued that her starving wasn't out of foolishness. She insisted she wasn't just hungry for no reason. She was taking a stand against them, making sure they knew she wouldn't surrender. Shen Yining glanced at her and remarked coolly that only children use hunger strikes to prove their own importance to others. Lan fell silent for a moment, finding herself speechless. Just then, we see Meng Wei suddenly making her way over to them. She introduced herself politely, knowing these sponsors represented powerful corporations. Without this show, she might never have met people of this caliber. Regardless of whether she could explain herself later, she figured it was best to make her face known to the big players now. She had already been quietly observing the sponsors since coming downstairs. To her, the woman standing before her seemed different. Whether in poise or attire, this person carried an aura far more imposing than the other sponsors. Naturally, Meng Wei realized she had to take the initiative and seize this opportunity. She reached out a hand to Shen Yining, but the older woman simply stared at her without reciprocating the gesture. It was a cold reception. Meng Wei felt a sudden, inexplicable wave of fear and tension. She was starting to regret being so bold as to approach her. After several seconds of agonizing silence, while Meng Wei waited in a state of nervous unrest, Shen Yining finally spoke with total indifference. She noted that she recognized her, the woman who wanted eggs but didn't want to buy them, so she tried to leech off a male guest. She asked if she was indeed that woman. Meng Wei's face turned bright red as the online viewers began to erupt with laughter. The audience was delighted by her sharp tongue. To be honest, this beautiful sponsor was saying exactly what everyone else was thinking. One viewer even joked that she was their spirit animal, finally saying to Meng Wei's face what needed to be said long ago. The fans were starting to love this woman's style, someone who wasn't afraid to openly call out unfair behavior on behalf of others. Shen Yining still made no move to shake hands. Meng Wei gave a dry, strained laugh, her fingers twitching awkwardly before she withdrew her hand. She stammered that there must be a misunderstanding and that she wasn't that kind of person. But the damage, it seemed, was already done. Seeing that Shen Yining clearly didn't care for her, Meng Wei stopped embarrassing herself, muttered a few pleasantries, and led her own sponsor away. As breakfast began, Meng Wei stepped out of the dormitory feeling she had lost face, bitterly thinking that having money didn't give that woman the right to act so superior. She vowed that once she was wealthy, she would reclaim her dignity twofold. Meanwhile, Lan didn't follow Meng Wei's lead in trying to flatter Shen Yining. After a brief greeting to Xiao Cheng, she simply turned and led him upstairs, with the young man following closely behind her every step. The netizens began to speculate, noting that if they didn't already know Xiao Cheng was a sponsor, they would have mistaken this duo for a lady and her butler. To be honest, the dynamic really did look like a noble woman and her attendant. We see the viewers starting to wonder if Lan is actually the most mysterious guest here. She seemed so low-key, and while her presence in the show hadn't been strong yet, there was a growing sense that she was hiding something. The audience felt that given the production team's usual habits, they would never cast someone who didn't bring something significant to the table. We have the stingy Fu Yansheng, the opportunistic Meng Wei, the perpetually hungry Feng Yu, and the overly virtuous Ji Mingchuan. Each one of them is a handful in their own way, which makes Lan, who seems so normal and ordinary, stand out as the true anomaly. It would be strange, after all, for a show to cast a plain person without any unique traits, as that would drain all the drama from the screen. Many agreed, though some were more focused on the 5 main guests and the sponsors they were tasked to entertain. Ji Mingchuan and Feng Yu were assigned to Director Fong of the AC Group, a man whose stern expression radiated the authority of a high-level boss. He told Feng Yu they were going to breakfast, speaking with the commanding tone one might use for a subordinate. Without even a glance back, he turned and walked away, looking down his nose at everyone. Feng Yu watched his retreating back with growing irritation. The interaction made her feel incredibly uncomfortable. She wondered who he thought he was, ordering a young lady like her around so casually. The irony, of course, was that Director Fong was technically spending her money, yet he was the one acting bossy. She wasn't about to tolerate that. Ignoring the risk of offending a sponsor, Feng Yu turned and went back upstairs to sleep. Director Fong walked a few paces before realizing she wasn't behind him. He was forced to turn back, his face darkening with every step as he realized his subordinate had simply abandoned him. With his temper visibly fraying, Director Fong had no choice but to head upstairs to find her. Suddenly, the lobby felt much emptier. This left only Shen Yining standing there, momentarily unclaimed. With everyone else paired off, he looked rather like a lonely king without a kingdom. Zhao Lin, worried that Shen Yining might be displeased, immediately offered to go upstairs and hurry the guests, but before she could finish, a figure appeared. Fu Yansheng walked down from the upper floor, and seeing that slender figure standing in the lobby, he walked straight over and proactively extended a hand. He introduced himself as Fu Yansheng, and Shen Yining, with a slight curl of the lips, slowly raised a hand to meet his. Those delicate fingers rested briefly against Fu Yansheng's well-defined knuckles as Shen Yining asked if they could chat upstairs, to which he naturally agreed. The netizens were in an uproar, marveling at the beauty of the Zhongjing Group's boss and noting why so many people fought to work there every year. They joked that having such a boss would improve anyone's mood at work, though some noticed how differently Shen Yining treated Fu Yansheng compared to Meng Wei. Fu Yansheng then led Shen Yining up to the 3rd floor, heading toward his own private room for a more personal conversation. Inside the room, away from the prying eyes of the live broadcast cameras, Shin Yiming hadn't even had time to look around before the door was shut tight. Shin Yiming turned to look at him, a brow slightly arched in a silent question, while Fu Yinxing leaned lazily against the door with his hands in his pockets. He asked if it was true that the sponsor didn't have a single cent on him, a question that seemed to catch Shin Yiming off guard. It seemed absurd that a sponsor for the program wouldn't have any money, yet that was exactly what Fu Yinxing was trying to confirm. He worried that the sponsor wouldn't even get a decent meal while following them, but Shin Yiming simply tilted his head and laughed softly. With dark eyes meeting his, Shin Yiming casually spread his arms and invited him to search his person, adding that anything found would be his. Seeing Shin Yiming standing there so openly, the small glimmer of hope in Fu Yinxing's heart instantly vanished into thin air. He had originally hoped to squeeze a little money out of the sponsor, the most powerful person on set, after all, but it seemed there would be no shortcuts. Realizing he could only rely on himself now, Fu Yinxing felt a chill of disappointment, quickly telling Shin Yiming there was no need for a search. He claimed to trust the boss completely, and Shin Yiming, seeing there was nothing else to discuss, prepared to head back out. Fu Yinxing asked him to wait in the lobby for a moment, explaining that he had been so busy with applications he hadn't even washed his face yet. Shin Yiming told him not to rush, his red lips moving as if he wanted to say something more, though he ultimately remained silent. Fu Yinxing stepped aside to open the door, but as Shin Yiming walked past him, the sponsor suddenly came to a dead stop. Shin Yiming paused and told him that a young man should learn to protect himself and not let other women into his room so easily. With that, he stepped out, leaving Fu Yinxing staring at his back in speechless silence, while barely 3 minutes had passed. The netizens were shocked he came out so quickly, wondering what they could have possibly discussed that VIP viewers weren't allowed to hear. Some joked they expected Fu Yinxing to try something bold, but the CEO emerged completely unscathed, much to the amusement of the veteran fans. These longtime followers pointed out that knowing Fu Yinxing, he wouldn't be after romance, he would only be after the money. They speculated he was trying to seduce the sponsor to secure first place, especially since this was the powerful boss of the Zhongjin group. In their eyes, any ordinary person would have tried to cling to such a powerful figure long ago. But Fu Yinxing knew he had no money for gifts, and simply talking about his strength wouldn't give the big boss enough time to see it. He told himself he would never sell his soul for a shortcut, as the point of earning money was to provide a better life for those he loved. He didn't want to do anything that would make his loved ones worry, so he decided it was more realistic to focus on the 5 million prize. After a quick wash, we see him head down to the first floor to find Shin Yiming on the sofa, asking if he'd like to grab breakfast. Shin Yiming agreed and followed behind him, though to be honest, the sponsor had no idea what kind of meal he was in for. The netizens were also worried for Shin Yiming, knowing that the places Fu Yinxing visited usually required a very thick skin. Without a strong psychological state, one simply couldn't survive a meal with him, and after 20 minutes of walking, they finally arrived. Their destination was a newly opened breakfast shop with a large sign on the glass window offering free porridge to celebrate the opening. An elderly lady working there saw the two of them standing at the entrance and immediately waved them over with a warm, welcoming smile. She called out to the handsome guy and beautiful girl, urging them not to just stand outside and to come in to see what they liked. Fu Yinxing walked in with perfect composure and a charming smile, calling her big sister as he pointed out the sign for free porridge. He asked if she wasn't worried about losing money if every customer only came in for the free food, prompting the lady to look them over. She laughed it off, saying that since they were running the promotion, they weren't afraid of people coming in to eat their fill. He told her they would eat their fill, flashing a brilliant smile while praising the big sister for her incredible generosity. He added that she was quite beautiful too, leaving the elderly lady beaming with joy as she hurriedly led them toward the self-service dishes. Fu Yinxing insisted they could manage on their own, politely telling her to tend to her work while she marveled at how sweet-talking and well-mannered he was. Once she left, however, we see that he didn't pick up a single side dish, turning instead to search for the porridge station. He led Shin Yiming over to the selection, which was actually quite impressive, featuring vegetable, preserved egg, millet, and chicken porridge. With 6 or 7 varieties to choose from, he turned to Shin Yiming with a grin, asking the CEO to take a look at the options. He jokingly declared this area the territory he had conquered for the boss, offering to treat him with the utmost hospitality. Shin Yiming let out a soft chuckle and opted for the vegetable porridge, to which Fu Yinxing readily agreed. As he served a bowl, he noticed the sponsor glancing toward the cooked food and side dishes, so he quickly set the porridge down. He then physically nudged the man's head back toward the porridge, explaining that the other territory was off-limits because his pockets were currently empty. He told the boss he'd just have to make do for now, a statement that left the netizens watching in a state of utter disbelief. The viewers joked that if the two of them really sat there drinking free porridge without ordering a single dish, they would feel embarrassed on their behalf. They pointed out that despite having over 900 yuan, Fu Yinxing was unwilling to spend even a penny on Shin Yiming. The fans were dying of laughter, pitying the poor CEO who was being treated to a meal where even a side dish was considered a luxury. They knew that a stingy man like Fu Yinxing wouldn't spend a cent, even if the person sitting across from him was his billionaire sponsor. Since the porridge was free and unlimited, something he had personally confirmed with the owner, he saw no reason to pay for anything else. Their behavior soon drew strange looks from the other customers, but deep down, Fu Yinxing's mental state was far too strong to care about their opinions. He reasoned that free porridge didn't require a purchase, though to be honest, he would have preferred a side dish if he weren't so focused on the prize money. After a few bites of his preserved egg porridge, he looked up at Shen Yiming, worried the high and mighty So might feel out of place with this freebie lifestyle. To his surprise, the man remained perfectly calm, eating with a slow, methodical elegance that made the simple meal look like a fine dining experience. He looked as though he were dining at a Michelin-starred restaurant, maintaining an air of elegance that felt entirely out of place in such a humble setting. While other tables were overflowing with side dishes, pies, and shrimp dumplings, our duo sat before a table that was, quite frankly, completely empty save for 2 bowls of porridge. No matter how calm or graceful they appeared, the contrast with the surrounding feast made them look rather pitiful, so much so that one could almost hear a mournful Eru solo playing in the background. Deep down, we have to assume that Shen Yiming, who was born with a silver spoon in her mouth, had never eaten such a miserable meal in her entire life. When the owner of the shop realized that Fu Yinxing and Shen Yiming were truly only there for the free porridge and wouldn't be ordering anything else, she couldn't help but watch them. With a look of pure bewilderment, eventually leaning in to ask if the woman was his girlfriend, he quickly clarified that she was actually his boss. The owner had a sudden moment of realization. If she was the boss, then Fu Yinxing's incredibly stingy behavior suddenly made perfect sense to her. Since this shop only opened in the morning, Fu Yinxing couldn't stay all day, which was a shame, as he quite liked the idea of free food and air conditioning. Shen Yiming didn't eat nearly as much as he did, finishing only a single bowl, though she ate with a slow, deliberate pace that stretched the meal out. When she finally finished, he frowned and asked if one bowl was really enough to fill her up, to which she simply nodded. To be honest, she was quite a picky eater. Usually, she wouldn't even touch food that didn't suit her palate, but today was a very different story. She forced herself to finish the porridge because she feared that if she didn't, her next 2 meals might be something even more difficult to swallow. She knew that participating in this program wasn't about enjoyment, but even with all her mental preparation, she realized she had vastly underestimated the challenge. After breakfast, he led her all over the city under the guise of hospitality, visiting parks, kindergartens, and shopping malls. At every stop, they collected free bottled water, masks, snacks, and even facial masks, anything that was being given away for free in public spaces. When lunchtime arrived, he unexpectedly suggested they skip it in favor of afternoon tea, casually canceling their midday meal without a second thought. He looked at her with total sincerity and promised to treat her to a massive feast for dinner, a guarantee that Shen Yiming accepted without any complaint. She curled her lips into a smile, looking far more approachable and radiant than when she was being serious, and simply agreed to his plan. She seemed far more approachable now, and while some say beauty is a feast for the eyes, when one is truly starving, good looks are quite useless. We can almost feel Shen Yiming's despair through the screen. Honestly, what kind of life is this? Fu Yinxing either knows how to live, or he's just winging it. Either way, she has to make do. Poor Yiming is truly unlucky to be paired with someone as stingy as Fu Yinxing, especially when we see the other guests. The other teams and their sponsors are eating like royalty, but in this game, temporary glory matters little. The real key is who walks away with the 5 million prize. As for their promised afternoon tea, it turned out to be nothing more than free fruit and dessert samples at a local supermarket. He handed Yiming a single toothpick with a fruit sample before taking one for himself, promising her that this would suffice until the grand feast tonight. He urged her to trust him as he popped a piece of orange into his mouth, the sweet juice bursting across his palate and soothing his hunger. To a man this hungry, it tasted like a delicacy from heaven. He insisted the oranges were incredibly sweet and urged Yiming to try one immediately. Under his watchful gaze, her slender fingers gripped the toothpick and pierced a piece of orange, while his eyes followed the fruit's every movement. His gaze remained fixed on that tiny morsel of fruit, watching it with a sort of desperate, wide-eyed intensity. As it moved, he pointed out that even in his starving state, he was willing to share half with her. He asked if she could feel the absolute sincerity of his hospitality. Yiming gave a thin, weary smile and admitted she felt it. He nodded, noting that when hosting someone, sincerity is the only thing that truly matters. As long as the sentiment is there, nothing else is important. But then, Yiming noticed something. The orange in her hand and the last piece on the tray had both suddenly vanished into thin air. The very last remnants of their afternoon tea were simply gone. The orange had been completely devoured by him. He apologized, claiming he had no choice but to let his sponsor suffer just a little bit longer. Yiming looked down at the clean toothpick in her hand, wondering if the orange she held a second ago had merely been a hunger-induced hallucination. He tossed his own toothpick into the bin and looked up at her with a bright smile, telling her to hang in there just a while longer. It was a scene straight out of a tragedy titled The Vanishing Orange, a memory that would likely haunt Ening even 60 years from now. We can almost see her 60 years from now, reclining in a chair and telling her grandchildren how grandma didn't even get lunch that day, only potato chip crumbs. She was reduced to biting a toothpick while Fu Yanxing reached a new peak of stinginess, actually snatching food right out of his sponsor's hand. It was truly audacious, yet President Shun remained incredibly calm. One has to wonder how her temper stays so stable under such trying circumstances. Curious viewers began flocking to other live streams, desperate to see if President Shun was truly the most miserable sponsor of the bunch. They wanted a direct comparison to see just how tragic her situation was and exactly how miserly our king of savings could truly be. The first stop on this tour of comparison brings us to Ji Mingchuan's room, located inside a rather high-end light meal restaurant. There, Mingchuan and Vice President Li of Nanning Entertainment are seated on a sofa, enjoying a beef set meal valued at 58 yuan. Their total bill for this meal is 116 yuan. Earlier that morning, Mingchuan had already treated Li to beef noodles for 36 yuan. With only 70 yuan left in his pocket, Mingchuan stares at the bowl of beef before him and quietly swallows his saliva. He then pushes the bowl toward Vice President Li, asking him to make do for now and promising a much better meal once the show ends. After all, his current budget only allows for this level of hospitality. Vice President Li smiles and slides the beef back toward him. Li tells him it's fine and to eat his own meal, noting there will be plenty of opportunities later. Mingchuan's eyes instantly light up. His decision to offer his beef wasn't just about showing sincerity. His real focus was on that very last sentence he spoke. He hopes that if luck is on his side, he might secure Vice President Li's private contact information before the man leaves tonight. Oh, Mingchuan, with only 70 yuan left, how do you plan to survive the next 20 days? To be honest, it's enough to make one worry. We find ourselves wishing he'd show a bit more backbone. Watching him is almost stressful, especially when he acts this overly sweet. Is it really necessary to give all your beef to the sponsor? He might as well just starve himself. Still, compared to Fu Yanxing's side, Yanxing is truly stingy and President Shun is truly pitiable. And so, the viewers move on to their second stop of the day. We arrive at Meng Wei's livestream, where he is hosting General Manager Sun of Tianqing Insurance Company. They have gone to an authentic little restaurant with a pleasant atmosphere and very affordable prices. He addresses his guest, saying, "Manager Sun, we." He asks if they should have a drink, but then quickly reconsiders, noting that it might not be appropriate during working hours. Meng Wei agrees with a smile and hands the menu to Manager Sun, inviting him to take a look. He tells him to order whatever he likes, and Manager Sun chooses two very economical and practical dishes. After ordering the eggplant and stir-fried tomatoes with eggs, Meng Wei's smile widens, realizing how much money Sun is saving him. The fact that Sun doesn't drink either makes this a real bargain. Meng Wei is just thinking how great Sun is when the man speaks up. Having finished ordering, Manager Sun suddenly asks if he has ever looked into the world of insurance. To be honest, Meng Wei has never looked into it since he never buys it, but he feels he must show some respect and says he knows a little. Sun asks if anyone in his family has insurance, and Meng Wei recalls that his father once bought car insurance. When asked about life insurance, Meng Wei admits they have none. Sun casually remarks that life insurance is quite important these days. He explains that accident and medical insurance can cover many daily medicines, outpatient visits, and hospital stays. It can relieve a lot of pressure on one's family, and he notes that the insurance market is currently doing very well. He repeats that it reduces pressure and emphasizes that the reimbursement limits are quite high now. He mentions a female client from his company who had late-stage cancer. Her family had spent every cent they had on her treatment. Fortunately, she had Tianqing insurance, and his company delivered 300,000 yuan in cash directly to the hospital. Hearing about that 300,000 yuan in cash, Meng Wei feels a bit tempted and asks how one even goes about buying it. Sun tells him to note down a phone number for his department manager, who can customize a plan specifically for him. Meng Wei immediately pulls out his phone to save the number. One can't help but feel we just witnessed a mandatory advertisement. It seems Manager Sun is here to advertise and pick up clients. It's truly the first time we've seen a sponsor get a free ride from a guest. It's not easy to make Meng Wei want to spend money. It feels as though he's been completely brainwashed. Is he really going to buy insurance? He doesn't even have any money on him. Let's move on to see Miss In and her partner, Cheng. Our viewers are now comparing this to the third stop in Enlan's livestream, where she and Cheng from the Huafu group haven't even left their dorms, opting instead to eat instant noodles. Just a moment ago, Enlan went back to the supermarket to buy another batch of instant noodles, which, to be honest, seems to be their only plan for the day.